Well, welcome to the question and answer of July 24, 2020. This is a question and answer that we do on the Bridges of Meaning Discord server. If you want to be involved in this, we usually do them on Friday mornings, 10 p.m. California time. And we sometimes do other things, so check on the Discord server if that's what's coming up in any particular Friday. As you can see from last week's posting, we experiment with different forums. But if you'd like to participate, again, there's an invite to the Discord server below in the notes on the YouTube posting of this, and you can come and join us on Friday mornings. And this morning, Sherry is our MC, and I usually have an MC because that way I don't have to both try to think about answering questions and try and figure out where all the questions are. They're often posted during the week in the questions for PVK subsection of the Discord server. And the Discord servers, it's not a tool that everyone finds easy to use. People who are gamers already sort of know how to use it. Others who aren't have to learn how to use it. But we do this in the voice chat, and so far I think it's been a pretty good experiment. And so we'll keep doing it as long as people want to do it and as long as it seems fruitful. So thank you for coming here on a Friday morning, and thanks those of you who listen after I post it on YouTube. So, all right, Sherry, take it away.
Sure. Okay, so the first question is from Arkataka. What should the limits of doubt and questioning within the church? What should be the limits of doubt and questioning within the church? I won't be able to make the discussion or clarify the question at the moment because I'll be working. Hopefully this question does not cause too much confusion.
It's a great question, and one that I'm really wrestling with now a lot, because maybe in the next few weeks I haven't had a lot of time for video making lately because we're implementing a new software package at church, and so we're going to have a Living Stones app and a new Living Stones web page, and all the streaming is going to go through the Living Stones web page. And because of my concern that COVID might threaten the viability of Living Stones as it has been for the last number of years, the financial viability and basically their ability to afford me. I'm probably 60 to 70% of the church's expense is my salary, and so I've been thinking a lot about how the church can be online, and those of you who know that my default position remains, which is online church isn't really church. You can't get water of baptism or bread or wine of communion over the internet, but it certainly is clear from my experience making videos that there are a significant number of people who, for one reason or another, aren't currently in church, and so having some form of ministry online seems to be a worthwhile thing to do. Now, that then very quickly raises all of these questions about doubt and questioning within the church. And this week I had a conversation with Michael, who has felt himself deconstructing and very much doesn't want to. Many of the people that, both the celebrities and others who leave the faith, often say they don't want to, but they either just don't find it believable anymore, or their scruples about intellectual integrity force them to, or they have issues with certain aspects of morality of traditional Christianity, and so off they go. And when I started the Jordan Peterson meetup, especially locally here, for me it was really a dream come true, because I always wanted the church to be a place for open questioning, and where people who are struggling with doubts or questions either feeling themselves sliding away from the church, or those who were approaching the church with curiosity, or even those who were antagonistic against the church. I wanted the church to be the kind of place where people could come with their honest questions and find a community to grapple with them. And when I started the Jordan Peterson meetup, that's sort of exactly what I got, because most of the people coming to the meetup were not faithful in any church. A good number of them were atheists or agnostics. Some of them had a history of being pretty vehemently anti-religious or anti-Christian. But here in the meetup, we found a space where we could have conversations about this. And critical for me is that Christians could express their questions and doubts and disagreements with even central church teachings, as I think we've seen on the Discord server. Even questions about something as central as the Trinity. There's a lot of debate about that. And the difficulty that you have in a church is, not unreasonably, you will lose status if you question these kinds of things in church. Churches have, especially since the Reformation, taken up a practice of affirming propositional beliefs. Now, obviously, that goes far before the Reformation. You have only to read the Athanasian Creed and get a good look at that, or even the first epistle of John. So, propositional assent has always been an aspect of Christian faith, and I think some of the questioning and challenging of that validity that we see, let's say, through the work of John Vervaeke and others, I think some of that is fair pushback on the way that, in many ways, the Protestant Reformation elevated, at least formally, propositional assent quite a bit higher than the three other P's. It's always been my position that so often even this practice of elevating propositional assent is not entirely the case, because someone might come down at a Billy Graham crusade and pledge their life to Jesus, and just as I am without one plea. Well, pretty quickly the church is going to put some perspectival and some procedural and some participatory demands on someone who enters the church. And I think that, too, is proper and right. It's been interesting watching a whole new wave of catechumens enter the Orthodox Church, because in many ways the Orthodox Church continues many of the ancient practices of the church. You don't become a member of the church in an Orthodox church like you do in many black churches or many Baptist churches, where you pop up one Sunday like a jack-in-the-box and say, I believe, I want to join, and boom, you're in the tank, within an hour. That's not the way it is in an Orthodox church. You've got a year of process going in, and even then, if you go through all their classes, they still might not accept you. And so I think there's a place for that kind of demand in the process as well. Now, the question, what should be the limits of doubt and questioning within the church? I don't know if the best place of emphasis in that sentence is limits or within the church. In my experience, and John Van Donk and I have been talking about this recently, because he's been working with his congregation to start a ministry that he calls Conversations on the Edge. And I see this very much in terms of the meetup that we do. I think the church needs a space for everyone and anyone, where people can come and talk and be themselves and belong in that space. And I'm thinking about how to structure that with Living Stones online, and I might use the word estuary, because to me an estuary is like the California Delta or the New Jersey Meadowlands. It's a place where freshwater and saltwater mingle. And so you have some freshwater creatures and you have some saltwater creatures, and it's a terribly important and productive ecosystem that for migratory birds and for all kinds of things. And so for me, I think, and if I, the weakness of Living Stones right now is also an opportunity, because it's usually churches that are strong that struggle with these things, because part of their strength is their unity around certain ideas. Now, Living Stones is weak and fragile right now, so there'll be a fair amount of chaos, and so let's take advantage of that chaos, and let's have the kind of productive chaos that an estuary can have. Now, I think it is important for the church itself and the church proper to have propositional demands of propositional assent. Jesus is Lord, creeds and confessions. I think that is proper catechesis. I think all of that is proper and good in the church. But I think we should practice both bounded and center set dynamics, because I think those two sets of dynamics are actually within the same economy. And I think the church also needs to have an estuary where anyone can belong. Now, all kinds of things are going to have to be worked out in terms of practices with the Lord's Supper, participation in decision making for the church. And I know in our egalitarian culture, we get very upset at the idea of levels of, at hierarchies of membership as such. But I don't really know if it's possible to get away from that. Maybe they'll let you into the local chapter of the National Rifle Association if you own a gun. Maybe you can even attend the meetings if you're for very restrictive gun control. But they're not going to let you into leadership, because any organization that is about anything by its nature will not be about other things. And Jonathan Peugeot makes this point about as eloquently as anyone, that there needs to be a structure, there needs to be a center, there needs to be a fringe. And in God's creation, it seems, the Lord has afforded his mercy and generosity for both center and fringe. And so, to me, churches need to have those sort of functions. So, and I think there's also a place for public and private. Someone, like in my denomination, in order to be a minister in the Christian Reformed Church, I have to sign the covenant of office bearers. And that means I subscribe to certain creeds and confessions. Now, it could also mean, and actually in the process of this, it could mean that for a time in my life I have some doubts about some of the aspects of the things I have subscribed to. That is assumed and understood. Now, what I promise to do is not teach or preach against them as a minister in the Christian Reformed Church. And I did an interview with John Sook recently, or not too recently, but a little while ago, who, and I really respect his integrity for this. He said, I no longer can really subscribe to these things within the Christian Reformed Church that I am required to subscribe to, so I am going to leave the denomination. He didn't take a church out with him. And I think that was a respectable, credible thing for him to do. So I think there needs to be structure, and there can be structure within the church for quiet questioning, not necessarily challenging or being a rebel within the church to try to take it down. But I think there also needs to be ways to belong, even if you don't believe within the church community. And what I see happening now is that within the fragmented ecclesiology of Protestantism, there are many experiments underway in that. My friend Rod Hugan, his church is not technically a part of the Christian Reformed Church, even though Rod is an office bearer within the Christian Reformed Church. His ordination is held by a local Christian Reformed congregation, but he is on loan to the Village, which is the church he helped plant. And I think they're only the only thing they have to assent to is the Apostles' Creed. But there are practices, obviously, within the church. And they, for example, have one-year memberships. And so every year, at a point, people are asked, are you going to re-up your membership? That's not the way it works in the Christian Reformed Church. In the Christian Reformed Church, in a sense, you're a member until you are disciplined. It's really the way it is in the Christian Reformed Church. You're a member until you're disciplined. There's no resigning your membership, because in the theology of the Christian Reformed Church, you don't own it. It's owned by Christ and the church, not by you, even though, practically speaking, when people today resign or leave the Christian Reformed Church, they functionally resign their membership, and there's usually not a case of formal discipline. But those are some old traditions. So I don't know that there are limits of doubt or questioning. I think churches have to figure out how to structure themselves so there is both the kind of honest doubt and questioning that normally happens both in the lives of people who have made a commitment towards faith and those who are outside of the church. And I think the church needs to afford spaces, estuaries, for people who are outside of the church, or maybe they leave. And so, again, there's my friend Rod's church. People, maybe if they're in a period of doubt or questioning, they don't re-up their membership that year to the Village. That's really the main question in what he wrote, and so I'll leave it there.
Okay, thank you, Paul. I just had a couple thoughts while you were talking.
Yeah, go ahead.
I know that in ecology or environmental studies, the edges are always the most diverse and fruitful. Field and forest is where most life is, right at the edge. And the same with salt and sweet water, and there's probably lots of other examples. I just can't think of them at the moment. So that's a really good analogy. I like that. And then the other thing, a thought popped into my head. Kierkegaard really talks a lot about doubt, and there's just one quote from him that I like. Doubt is conquered by faith, just as it is faith which has brought doubt into the world.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. Okay. So the next question is.
Do we want anyone from the room right now? Any follow-ups on this question, or because we kind of go, one and then the other. So
I don't have a follow-up, but I have a question by itself. I can just do it through voice.
Okay.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So my question revolves around this quote by Karl Rahner, I think, and it's the Christian of the future will be a mystic or will not exist at all. So I'm wondering what you sort of think about that quote in general, what your interpretation or thoughts are.
The Christian of the future will be a mystic or
will not exist at all.
Karl Rahner, I probably misspelled his name because when I take my notes here.
Luke just put in the recording chat, convo recording chat, so you can see the spelling.
Okay. Let's see. If memory serves me, and I'm going to check it. Rahner, Reimer.
It's
Reiner. Okay.
It's
R-A-H-N-E-R. Oh, Rahner. Okay, that's the Roman Catholic Karl Rahner. That's the Roman Catholic theologian. Um, yeah, there he is. German Jesuit priest, theologian, alongside Lubach and von Balthasar, influential. Now, a comment like this will be very much located within the ongoing project of figuring out Christianity and modernity. Now, I haven't read around this. I'm not an expert by any means on Karl Rahner. I couldn't even spell his name. I've dabbled in a book or two of his. But just knowing the theological landscape and what they were wrestling with, I think the best way to, what do you mean by mystic? That's really the question here, because what modernity is a deep skepticism that there is anything outside of the material. And so I would understand that quote to mean, and I'm sure someone in the comment section after I post this on YouTube will improve it or correct me, but what it means, I think, is that you're really not going to be a pure materialist or a pure modernist and be a Christian without the understanding of God above and heaven. And I see, little God as absolute mystery, modernity of grace, criticism of Jesusisms, Christian faith in God, self-communication, transcendental Christology and meditation, Savior, and given, I would imagine that these are all things that I would expect someone struggling with the modernist frame to have to struggle with. And so I understand that quotation within that frame. And so to me, it's, now someone might want to go further and pile a lot more things on the mystic aspect of that. Well, it depends what you mean by mystic. So is someone who bows their head and prays before a meal to a God who is not seen, is that person a mystic? Or do you reserve the word for someone who isolates in a cell and has vivid visions and startling revelations? So, well, that depends on what you mean. But given, again, the modernist context that he and others around him were wrestling with, it does make sense to me.
Hey, can I piggyback on that real quick?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, just a really quick question. So we're talking about modernism, and I just thought I'd insert N.T. Wright, seeing as he has his very apt analogy for epistemology. He calls it the epistemology of love. What are your thoughts on that, Paul? I know you've mentioned it a little bit in some of your videos. How would you understand that in the context of your Reformed church theology structure? And how would you sort of go about that? It sort of relates a little bit to the clean room idea and your sort of what do you call it, monarchical vision.
Mm-hmm. Say a little bit more about how you understand it.
Sure. I'm a total noob when it comes to philosophy, so I'll give you the sort of layman's definition. What I got so far is basically it's a way of understanding the world that is based primarily on relationship to ideas rather than on propositional truth. That's a very basic way of understanding it.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess you could take in a couple of Vervaeke's P's here to help map this on to that context. But primarily what N.T. Wright's trying to argue for is a realist. Basically, he's trying to reclaim realism. And so to the previous question, we were talking about mysticism. And basically, if Christians cannot reclaim realism in a modernist context, then basically that's all we can become is mystics. And so N.T. Wright's project is basically saying, well, we don't want to become mystics primarily. We want to be realists. We want to have a seat at the table of culture, and there's something there, right? As he would like to say in his N.T. Wright way. And so his solution to that is to say that all of knowledge and understanding has to be seen in a relational context. So human beings seeing things in a human way, not just contextually as we would see like in foundationalism, but also at a very conceptual framework. I don't know how to say that in a simpler way. Like I said, I'm not super familiar with this. Thinkers that you might be familiar with are G.K. Lessing, his Broad and Ugly Ditch. You picking up with that?
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, just recently, N.T. Wright posted a piece which was quite good, and I read it. It was a few months ago. It was not very far, and I just went to my blog to see if I could find it, and I couldn't find it because that very much touched on his epistemology of love. And I think I think what you described, I think that's accurate if I recollect that article carefully or correctly. And the point is basically you can't know without loving, and that these things are inextricably linked, and I think that is correct. And I don't think that is. You see, here's the difficulty with modernity is that it derives its impressive powers by excluding consciousness and in invoking a monarchical kind of a fake monarchical vision to see the world from no place. Now that as an exercise, as a tool, is a very powerful thing and a very useful thing, but idolatry is forgetting that you're using a tool and imagining that you and the tool are one and you and the tool are God. And a monarchical vision is particularly seductive in that frame. And so in a sense, an epistemology of mysticism and an epistemology of love, I don't know, are that far apart, partly because both are attempts to once again, and I know this gets at a question that is coming up, both are attempts to once again reintegrate consciousness back into the system, which is exactly what modernity is. Hang on, I've got a text I have to answer. Okay, got it. Which is exactly what modernity has done. And so, especially when it comes to people, because love is at the top of the hierarchy for Christianity, especially when it comes to people, you can't know someone without love. And I think in some ways this parallels some of Vervaeke's work on care. I mean, caring about something is also a function of both love and attention. And that now it might be an anxious caring about something. It might be sort of you want to resist something. But I think all of these are attempts at once again reintegrating the fact that, as Jonathan Peugeot said to Andrea and Mercury, we are patterns viewing patterns. And in a sense, what the monarchical vision does is, well, let's pretend I'm not a pattern. And we will view patterns, well, with me not being a pattern. Okay, as if is a fine game to play, and it's very powerful. But at some point, you have to come back to terms with it. So, again, if someone, I can't pull up that article right away, but N.T. Wright posted it February, March, something like that. And it was quite a good article, and I think it nicely showed his epistemology of love. And
I shared it in the chat, so if you want to take a look at it, it's in the Convo recording chat.
Okay. Yep. That's it. So, just have to... Okay, I'll pull it up. Yeah, that's it. It was in First Things. That's right. To know, to love. Yes. So, yeah, I think all these are ways of reintegrating what... So modernity learned that it could be a powerful tool by excluding consciousness, by forgetting we are a pattern, looking at patterns. And so then we sort of made a god out of it. And in some ways, that's the god of modernity. And so you, in Karl Rahner's term, you have to be a mystic. In N.T. Wright's term, you have to love. And I think those are, they're not identical, but I think they're connected and related.
Shall I go on to the next one?
Yep, go ahead, Sherry. Thank you.
I just, in regards to what you were talking about, Paul, I was thinking, as Christians, we are called to martyrdom. And to love is to die to self, which is a form of martyrdom, for me anyway. And you know, you were saying that the N.T. Wright's perspective and the perspective of Rahner are close. I think they're actually saying the same thing. Anyway, okay, next question from the McScotty. I recently finished listening to Vervaeke's series on awakening from the meaning crisis. While I've certainly come away with some useful concepts, intellectual history, and means of reframing aspects of my understanding, I am not sure what to ultimately make of the whole thing. Would you just comment in a nutshell of sorts on what was the key message you took away from that series? It's a big nutshell.
It's a 51-hour videos. What I learned a lot. You know, it was just a good refresher course to go through kind of a history of philosophy again. And because I knew very little of cognitive science, apart from some of the stuff I picked up from Jordan Peterson, I got a better grasp on what he's talking about when he's talking about cognitive science. I thought his treatment of agape was profound. I really hadn't heard anybody speak with quite that power on agape. That was dramatic. His take on Buddhism I found very interesting and engaging, especially with reciprocal narrowing and the possibility of reciprocal broadening. One of the ways to know what I took away from it is to listen to my videos, which are just as long, because those are the things that sort of stick in my consciousness and that I bring up. His 4 Ps of perception. You know, one of the things that I, and I think many others have noted, is that, and he has acknowledged this is one of the primary purposes of his course, is to give us a common vocabulary to talk about some of these things. And if that was his goal, his course was certainly a success, because even though you have the experience, and many people, because I commented quite a bit on the course, many people would say things like, I can't listen to Vervaeke, I don't understand what he's saying. Okay, that's fair enough. It was a lot of hard sledding in some places, because he's bringing in new terms, he's using new language, and he keeps building on the terms he's used. So if you don't have some of the older terms, parasitic processing, if you don't have some of these older terms sort of cemented in your mind, he keeps building on them. The agent-arena relationship. There's all this stuff that he gave us, and I've found that as I continue to do my project, I will go back sometimes and rewatch a video, because the there's an idea that I grasped a little bit, and I knew that there was something there, so I'd go back and I'd listen again, and okay, I see it a little bit more clearly. So that for me has been the real takeaway from the Awakening from the Meaning Crisis series. Now, I think he, more than I am, is dependent upon others to do his filming and his video series. So I think, he's got these other projects about Socrates that are probably a little bit on hold because he uses a classroom and somebody to film it and then do the post-processing. Because I don't edit and I do all that myself, I being all by myself in a room with a PC, and I can do this. But I don't think that's true for John. So some of his other projects are on hold, and he's continuing to do conversations and such. So, but for me, the vocabulary and the language, and at least for those of us who are sort of understanding what he's trying to do, he has, I think, given us a common vocabulary so that myself as a Christian and he who is someone who knows a fair amount of Christian theology and some church history and a lot of philosophical history and cognitive science, he's sort of laid a foundation that we can have productive conversations across some of these divides that so often, it's been my experience that Christians and non-Christians should be able to understand each other better, but too often Christians are just speaking Christianese, and Christians are only talking to other Christians, and so they're not having a common language. And John Vervaeke has given us some really powerful elements of a common language. So that's really my takeaway.
Does anybody have anything, any thoughts on that? No? Okay, I'll go to the next question. This is from Roybs. So there's a bunch of little quotes from you, Paul. Somebody's been paying attention.
Oh boy.
You have to somehow reintegrate consciousness. Do work to figure out what things look like going forward. I think it will reintegrate many of the ancient truths. Some of the goodness and truthiness of modernism is going to have to stay, but it's going to have to be postmodern resistant modernity if it is going to endure. Postmodernism in many ways was an attempt to reintegrate consciousness, much of the attempt a failure, but consciousness has to be reintegrated into the system. Paul Vanderklay in a recent video. Any thoughts on how to successfully reintegrate consciousness into the system? A few random thoughts of my own that you are welcome to ignore. 1, this is what Barfield was getting at. 2, we need a consciousness wider than the consciousness of our own islanded egos. 3, one of the attractions of mindfulness meditation is that it attempts to make consciousness of our consciousness and its workings part of our daily life. And 4, there was a whole tradition of Christian meditation, self-examination, confession, contemplation of God via purgatoria, teachings by people like John of the Cross. Could this be brought into the 21st century in a Vervaekian manner, or like a recent revival adaptation of Stoicism?
Well, all really good questions. Okay, any thoughts on how to successfully integrate consciousness into the system? Well, I think that's part of what we're trying to do, and I think that's part of what Christians grappling with modernity, some of the Christians grappling with modernity have been trying to do. And as the last point, I think, makes, Christians have... So, in some ways, so my God number 1, God number 2 thing, in some ways, God number 2 is... And the bifurcation of them and the splitting of them, the splitting of God number 1 and God number 2, of God into God number 1 and God number 2, and then the loss of God number 1, that has everything to do with deism and modernity. And Christians doubling down on God number 2 is a way for Christians to reintegrate consciousness into the world. Pentecostalism was basically in some ways a a full-fronted denial of modernity and said, we don't care what the doctors say. We're going to practice healing in the church. We're going to practice direct revelation and prophecy in the church. We're going to, it's going to be God number 2, big and proud. And I think, but the problem was that wasn't terribly integral because God number 1 suffered in that. And Pentecostals that I knew would say things like, well, God doesn't bring evil, that's the devil bringing evil. And when Christians talk that way, even though the devil does bring evil, when Christians talk that way, they almost slip into a Zoroastrianism or some relationship where Satan is somehow equal to God. And of course Christians will backtrack on that because they know that's not proper theology. But all of these are attempts of grappling with the fact that we are patterns seeing patterns. Now, what I think I am wrestling to do, because, well, again, back to this, when Charles Colson, for example, comes home to his wife and says, I've become a Christian, and she says, I thought we were Episcopalian. You've got this situation where, okay, so now God number 2 is big and large in the room, and that sort of sets up the new atheists. And the fact that I think Peugeot is exactly right, that modernity is weakening and going to continue to weaken. Now, these things take long periods of time to work through, so centuries. And so it's not that, modernity is going to go away. No, it's hardly going to go away. Just like pre-modernity and post-modernity aren't going to go away anytime soon. And you can find elements of post-modernity in antiquity. And you can find elements of modernity in antiquity. And these things have been with us, and they probably wax and wane with us. So the successful integration of consciousness is what we're doing. Is this what Barfield was getting at? I think so. If y'all aren't listening to Karen and Michael on Karen's channel, The Meaning Code, when Karen and Michael get together, the conversations they have are just incredible. And Michael is, he has read Barfield carefully. He's read Lewis carefully. And Michael is doing all of this work of figuring out where this goes. And Michael's up on Vervaeke, and Michael's cognizant in Jordan Peterson. So, he's very much in this conversation, and he and Karen have these, lately they've been almost weekly, these lovely chats where, Karen just is bubbling over with questions, and Michael walks through them. They're really lovely videos. But yeah, I think Barfield understood this, and his work was very much, keeping the appearances. The difficulty with Barfield is he wasn't as clear a writer and explainer as someone like Lewis. Well, hardly anyone is. Even Chesterton, who is so brilliant, sometimes is difficult to penetrate. And Barfield can be difficult to penetrate. But this is exactly what Barfield is looking for. The reintegration of consciousness is the final participation that he is trying to get at. And in some ways, the separation, the loss of participation, that, again, you can find this in antiquity. When Jesus makes comments about, it's not what you put into your body that makes you unclean, but what comes out of your body. I mean, that is a separation, a loss of participation idea. And so Jesus, in fact, I think, makes progress with us by playing with these dynamics of participation and loss of participation. And, well, if Jesus is Lord of all, then these are his things to play with. And so I see him doing that in the Gospels. That came out very strongly in the Protestant Reformation. And that's still, I think, what we're wrestling with. And so, yes, Barfield is very much getting at it. We need a consciousness wider than the consciousness of our own island egos. That's certainly true. And when we talk about principalities and powers, And when we talk about spirits, and I usually use the example of school spirit, we are talking about, see, this gets so difficult, because when we say a consciousness, we can't help but identify that with our experience of consciousness, which each of us know. But in a sense, we assume that the others around us are having these similar experiences of consciousness. But just like with the question, is the red that you see the same red that I see? How do I know? And the sloshiness of language, the fudginess of language, these things reveal the fact that while we are amazingly enough able to communicate and use words to communicate aspects of consciousness, our consciousness is an island. And when we participate in a principality or a power or some sort of spiritual union, there is a sense in which our we have a combined consciousness as such. You experience that in a family when people know what others think when something happens. You experience that in a church. You experience that in a common culture. You experience that in a nation. These things scale up. Now, do we want to use the word consciousness for that? Do we want to use the word spirit for that? You know, and there's a fair amount of going back and forth over this question of the relationship between spirit and consciousness, because sometimes these words are close. You know, in the New Testament, you know, you have this word psyche that we use to. I'm gonna shut this phone up. Comcast Business. Yeah, don't want to talk to that. So in the New Testament, Jesus talks about, you know, the suke, which is your life, it's your soul, it's your being. So even in the Greek, these terms are intermingled. And when we think about our life, we so naturally identify it as our consciousness. But this isn't something that we fully share with other people. And it's for this reason that I don't imagine our final state is, as some Eastern traditions imagine, sort of one common consciousness. I'm a Christian, and I believe that the individuality of consciousness, of ego, of will be preserved into the life of the age to come, that I will be me. But that's a very tricky thing, because what is me? Because the me that I experience myself as being now here on my 57th birthday is even different from before this whole Jordan Peterson journey of mine and meeting Joey and Job and Luke and Sherry, and see, I have to start doing these names, and why didn't Paul mention me? And all of y'all, so there you're all there. But you know, you all have changed me. And is it still me? Yeah, it is still me. So there's a thread there. And I believe that thread will go off, that thread will go on into eternity, but so you don't lose the thread. And again, all of these are images of trying to get a handle on this stuff. So we do have to, you know, through language and through practices and through experiences, and we share and we join consciousness, but we don't lose the thread. I think conscious of our consciousness is helpful. I mean, I can't talk this way if I wasn't thinking about my own consciousness and trying to work on being more conscious of my consciousness. I guess the last question, yeah, absolutely, Christians have been working on these kinds of questions for a very long time, and there are elements within the Christian tradition that deeply get into this. I don't really know what a Vervaekian manner would mean. Perhaps a non-theistic manner. I I haven't thought about this before, and I haven't talked to John about this before because I haven't thought about it, but I wonder whether this non-theism, and John would have a lot to say about that because he knows what he's talking about far better than I do, whether or not this non-theism is in some ways a reduction of the consciousness that theism presumes. In other words, it's the modern practice to obtain great power by trading in consciousness. And this is part of the reason that I continue to embrace full theism, which is because, of course, your God is not only the system of all systems, but also the person of all persons. God is the ultimate consciousness. And part of the reason I'm not a non-theist is because if consciousness is this powerful, as we have seen demonstrated in human beings, why wouldn't that same power also scale up all the way? And so it would seem to me that at the heart of reality of existence of the universe is the ultimate consciousness. Because just looking around, seeing that it's human beings with their amazing powers of consciousness who have, in fact, grown to have dominion over this world. Why wouldn't it be the case that it's an ultimate consciousness that has dominion over all of these dominions? Consciousness seems to be the most powerful thing we know of in the universe, even under the sun, within the Christian frame. So I don't think you get further by somehow undermining ultimate consciousness. And maybe it's not fair, and John, of course, could, and maybe I should actually, just thinking about this, maybe he and I should have a conversation about this, because this is an interesting question that never really occurred to me. This is why I love these question and answers, because you people provoke new thoughts out of me that I couldn't think on my own. That's the way that our consciousness is intermingling, and we're hopefully, going into new ground. But I would think that non-theism is a reduction of consciousness at the very top. And given where consciousness, even collective consciousnesses in principalities and powers, are within the systems we see, I would think that consciousness goes all the way to the source of all consciousness and the ultimate consciousness, which will not have less of an ego than I have, not have less of a will than I have, not have less of a secure self than I can possibly have, but in fact have all of those things at its utmost. And I think it's in that way that we sort of have an ontological argument here, that here at the core of all being will be the consciousness of which all of our consciousnesses are smaller reflections. And so that's, and when Jonathan Peugeot was asked about Stoicism when he was on the Stoa, I loved his answer. Stoicism went away because in many ways Christianity subsumed it. And I think this is why when modernity tries to, when modernity gets idolatrous ambitions, it begins to break down, because something, even a monarchical vision, sees, and the consciousness of all consciousness sees everything clearly, and is, when in many ways when we say God is everywhere, we are saying there is no limit to his consciousness. His consciousness is in this room right here with me, but it's not contained by this room. And so I think it's in that way that I have my own ideas about, my own suspicions about where reductive ideas like non-theism might come from, but I won't embrace it because I think I am embracing a lesser thing when in fact I have greater things available to me. So I think that's the best I can do with that question.
Thanks, Paul. Does anybody have any thoughts or follow-up questions? Okay.
Hi there. My
go
name's
ahead.
Aaron. It's interesting. I'm a Catholic and kind of an odd one at that because I'm gay and Latin Mass only from a charismatic background. So I have quite the mix. But when you're talking, what it's interesting to me is I'm looking at this from Aquinas' perspective, right? And I don't know how much I have to apologize. I haven't gone through Vervaeke as much. I don't know how much he's looked into that, but I'm wondering if you've ever encountered Edward Feser, for example, who's done a lot of work specifically dealing with how pre-modern ideas actually are undergirding many of the modernist assumptions. So his book, Aristotle's Revenge, I'm going through right now, for example, deals with some of this. And I'm wondering if you've encountered that kind of framework before.
I haven't. There are some, there are some Aquinas nerds in this little community. Trip is one, and I dabbled in one of an audiobook of Edward Feser, and he's there's someone I'd like to know more of, but it just hasn't come about yet. So great question, and I think you're probably right. So much of this stuff we keep having to rediscover because it's forgotten, and Brett Sockold's book on Aquinas and then Luther and Calvin I thought was such an excellent treatment of that, because in a sense Luther, because language and culture moved on, Luther misunderstood Aquinas and attacked Aquinas in a sense, in a way to try to recapture Aquinas, but he didn't really know it. So I think we're probably going through those kinds of things all the time. And so I think you're probably right, but I don't really know enough to speak with any intelligence on it. So if you have something to add, and if you want to expand and elaborate, see, the reason I like doing this in a context like this is for exactly this reason, because you have stuff I don't know, and I love learning. So I don't know if you have anything you'd like to expand on that more, Aaron?
Yeah, definitely. So I'm a bit of an Aquinas nerd as well. I helped the Scholastic School in Berkeley organize their first conference where John Searle showed up and that sort of thing. So I'm definitely in it, but I'm not a philosopher per se. I have a friend who's a professor of metaphysics at St. John's in Minnesota, but I've just been reading Aquinas pretty extensively for the last decade. What I would say is, when we're talking about consciousness, Aquinas is very clear that there are basically two faculties that exist within the mind. First is the intellect, and the second is the will. And what modernity attempted to do was essentially separate the intellect from the will, because the will is where all of our desires reside. But Aquinas recognized you can do that to an extent because the intellect corresponding with reality is truth. In other words, there is no truth outside of the intellect. Mm-hmm. And modernity attempted to arrive at a truth without intellect. But he also understood that you actually cannot have any conception of anything without the will. That is to say that the intellect and the will are fundamentally one mind. It's a real distinction, but it is also the type of distinction where they could never exist separately. Mm-hmm. And what we're seeing now in postmodernism is the assertion that the will is primary rather than the intellect. And so I'm just seeing all these things, playing out. And so just Aquinas' anthropology more generally, rooted in Aristotelianism, synthesized a lot of the ancient Greek thought with, the scriptures, etc. And he definitely got a lot of things wrong, because he was using their scientific, methodology. But I think his fundamental metaphysics and understanding of the human person was fundamentally correct. And so I've been approaching a lot of these issues, especially as a gay guy, because I've been trying to understand myself. How does my sexuality exist within a Christian and a Thomistic framework? So I don't know. I have a lot more thoughts on this. I could probably go on forever, but I think that's where I would, leave it for now.
Well, maybe you should do a YouTube video or a YouTube channel. That's a good place for long thoughts. Thank you, Aaron. This is really wonderful.
Yeah, I have a YouTube channel, but the thing is, I'm in law school right now.
Oh,
yeah. So my law school priority, and I have a lot at stake right now with I represent a family estate and things like that, where I can't be as public as I want to be because some projects are in the works.
Right.
So I'm looking forward to the day when I can just sort of put everything I want out there, but I don't want to jeopardize my scholarship and some other things that I have at stake, because God knows that cancel culture today will go after the people that are most dangerous to them, and somebody who's gay, Catholic, of Jewish descent is not going to be, taken too kindly for not towing the line. I don't want to put a target on my back.
Absolutely. I often say that YouTube is a place for people with little to lose. So no, stay off YouTube, but keep doing your thinking and your developing of this. And this to me is why I am so excited about the life of the age to come, because I would imagine that in the age to come, Aquinas and Luther can work through their disagreements, and don't you want to be there to, they've been working at it a while now, I suspect, but don't you want to be there to and if you listen to Peter Kraft, maybe Socrates and Plato, and I'm going to let God be the judge of who God wants in on these conversations and exactly how that works. But I think it's amazing. So thank you, Aaron. Thanks for your question. Thanks for piping in.
Yeah, and Aaron, there's probably a number of people on the Discord that would love to get into a conversation with you. So there's always that too.
Yeah. I actually wrote a book on, it was funny because, this is probably more controversial here, but I'm actually, I used to be in, especially in the gay stuff, I wrote a book specifically defending the church's position, and in the process of writing the book realized I could never not affirm it. So I just want to be upfront, but I'm not, I don't know. I have a lot of nuances, and I'd be happy to get involved with people in private conversations or on channels or things like that. But for now, I'm not planning on being more public. So feel free to DM me or, I don't know, start a channel or something. As long as I can respond, because I'm also in law school, and I'm supposed to be writing a appellate brief right now. So.
Yes, the things we do when we're avoiding what we should be doing. I know it well. Thank you so much, and thanks for sharing a little bit of yourself. And absolutely, I think you'll, in a community like this, there'll be people who very much want to talk to you. So Wonderful.
Okay, I'm going to go on to the next question. Whoops, I better not mute myself. Okay. This is from Gomer Day. Is there a difference between what is sin in the Old Testament time versus New Testament time? Do people in the Bible see, view, and understand sin as same, or did it evolve through the time? Thank you for your time. P.S. When I talk about sin, I'm not talking about sin in the description of what Jordan Peterson said. I would like to know what's your denomination, Reformed Christian, has to say about what sin is. I hope that clarifies things a bit.
Okay. Sin is missing the mark in my denomination. And sin is the difference this gets complicated quickly. There's sin and corruption is in some ways the consequence of sin, but often we use sin for corruption as well. Because words are sloshy and fudgy, sin is as sloshy and fudgy as many things. My denomination and my tradition has tended to emphasize sin as such more than sins in particular. Each manifestation of sin is a participation in the missing of the mark. Now, the missing of the mark, I think, is something that falls short of the glory and the will of God. And it's something that falls short of perfection. And so total depravity means not that I am as depraved as I could be, but that even the very good areas of my life miss the mark in one way or another. The Old Testament has various images of sin, and the Bible, as I think Jonathan Peugeot so ably demonstrates, the Bible communicates with us with images and symbols. Sin is sometimes a burden that you can put, for example, on a goat or a sacrificial animal and have that goat carry it out into the wilderness being kind of an uninhabited land. It's, in a sense, sending chaos back out to the land of chaos. Wilderness in the Bible is parallel to the sea. And wilderness, and because even in fact, there's some common language between monsters of the sea and monsters of the wilderness. The jackal is a monster of the wilderness, and Leviathan is the monster of, the monster of the sea. Locusts are monsters of the wilderness, and lobsters are monsters of the sea. And so there's parallel there. So sin can be carried away by an animal into the wilderness. Sin can be placed upon an animal and placed into the consuming fire of God and be consumed by that consuming fire of God in a sacrifice. Sin can be a stain, which is, now a stain is an interesting thing because a stain on your clothing mars the clothing. It takes away from the glory of the clothing. The clothing isn't necessarily completely destroyed by the stain, but the clothing is diminished by the stain. And so sin is sometimes a stain. Sin is sometimes, so it can be a weight that can go on a sacrificial animal. It can be a stain that can go on clothing. What's the one I'm not thinking of? Sin is a stain. Sin is a weight. Sin is a debt. That's another very common one in the Bible. That sin is a debt, and so the ideas of substitutionary atonement are that sin is a debt. And here's the handy thing about a debt. It can be the same power that makes debts pass to others also make them redeemable by others. In other words, if I incur a debt, someone else can pay my debt. And once you get this sense of sin in these images and symbols, you can very quickly see that when it comes to redemption, what is redemption? Redemption is sin is also imprisonment. Redemption is someone being freed from an imprisonment or freed from a debt. Notice how this language communicates and goes back and forth in different ways. The Old Testament and New Testament aren't very far from each other in terms of sin, I don't think. And maybe you should find Jacob. It's often Christians can't see themselves in some ways as clearly as non-Christians see them. And so someone who knows the Hebrew Scriptures very well could better tell me if any of these concepts are alien to the Hebrew scriptures without the Greek New Testament. Because what tends to happen for Christians is that ideas in the New Testament we read back over onto the Hebrew scriptures, which a lot of Jews find very annoying, just like Christians sometimes find it annoying when Mormons read back onto the Bible ideas from the Book of Mormon. That's sort of how these stackable holy books work. Same way with the Quran and the Old and New Testaments. So that's, let's see, is there a difference between what is sin in the Old and New Testaments? Time? I don't know. Part of what happens in time and culture is different things get emphasized in different ways. But you'll find in the New Testament, again, you'll continue to find the sacrificial system, at least as practiced before the temple is destroyed. And what happens is that a lot of these images get appropriated in different ways, even when the original practices of them go away. So when we take up, what do you do in a Protestant church? You take up an offering. Now, what was an offering? An offering would have been, we're going to take the offering, and the doors open and people lead a bunch of goats and oxen into the building, because an offering is an animal that you place on a sacrifice. Well, now we pass this plate, and now even we give, we give online. We give our offerings in terms of money. This is in some ways rather ironic for a church whose founders overturned the money changers, who basically were, taking unclean Roman coin and transferring it into coin that was acceptable to the temple, and taking gold and translating it into sacrificial animals. That was the purpose of this market that Jesus overturned. So I don't see that there's a lot of difference between Old and New Testament. Do the people in the Bible see, view, and understand sin as same, or did it evolve through time? There's a lot of debate on that. I suspect it evolved through time. I don't know that we can track how it evolved, and there is a book about sin that I own that I'm just looking around my office right now to see if I can just sort of spot it. But it goes into these different images of sin, and some might argue that some of those images are older than the other. Perhaps debt is the newest of them, perhaps weight is the oldest, or stain, burden, bondage. I don't know. But I'm sure, I know they continue to evolve, because again, when you take an offering in church, if your deacons went out, at least in my church, to take the offering, and someone presented them with a kitten as a sacrificial animal, the deacons wouldn't have it. They would say, no, we'll take cash or check or online donations. So I hope that scratched where you're itching.
So does anybody in the room have a question?
Hey, Sherry, it's Jeff.
Hi, Jeff.
I've got a follow-up to that, Paul, just real quick, and then I also have a non-related question. I don't know if you said this in your answer, but I've heard sin referred to also as kind of like a sickness or a disease.
Yep, I forgot that one.
Is it referred that way in Scripture? I can't remember.
It's very much connected with it, and it's connected with it in the in various passages where illness is connected with sin. The man born blind, confessing your sins so that you're healed. So yeah, it's very much related, but I'm trying to think of an example of it being sickness itself. But again, that's part of the missing the mark.
Okay. So here's my question. I'm usually better if I write it out, but so it's been my experience that I have formed the strongest relationships in my adult life with people that I have worked with. Now, my first real job as a professional lasted for over 20 years. So I forged a lot of day-to-day relationships. You know, you're seeing everybody 5 days out of the week for the majority of the day, interacting with some project or another, and that builds a lot of bonds. So I don't work with those people anymore, but they're still my closest friends that aren't family in real life. One of the issues that I saw and that I actually discussed with a pastor that I had in the past with church is, well, I'm so busy as a professional during the week, I have spare time left over for my family, and then I go to church on Sunday for, you know, that limited window of time. I can't really forge what I feel like are deep or meaningful relationships with the people that I see there, because there's just not enough, there's not as much opportunity, you know, from a time perspective. And so my question for you is, I'm just curious if you have ever seen that problem in the churches that you've either attended or led, and how that is best overcome.
Great question. Have I seen it? Yes. I think it, in some ways, we are built for kinship tribes and villages that are very small. And it would be nice if the people that you were related to, or the people that you work with, or the people that you worship with. And I think this is very old in terms of human development, that, you know, here you work with your clan, and you have, you know, your clan, and you have your village, and your village might be just a few hundred people, and you go out into the fields and you work with them, or you hunt with them, and you worship with them. You know, just look at, let's say, an Indian tribe on the Great Plains. All of their social relationships are a cohesive whole. I just started the book this morning, Being Mortal, and he opens with the story of his grandfather, that, you know, the family takes care of the grandfather. It's an extended family. It's one cohesive whole. You know, we call the leaders of the churches elders. And, well, that comes from the Old Testament. You had these tribal elders. Well, who were they? I mean, it's all of those relationships were in one seamless fabric. Well, that is no longer the case for us. We live in these massive cities. We have these nuclear families. Some of our early bonds are with our classmates, because we're with them all the time, and that's where we make our friendship groups and maybe find our mates. And so you're exactly right that, well, what do we do? How, you know, then we go to church and we have all this elevated language of brother and sister and fellowship and communion. And, you know, the church I've served in here, sometimes people will come to church and think, oh, I need to go to church because I want to make some friends. And they very quickly discover that most of the people in the church have plenty of other friends that aren't members of the church, but they may feel closer to those friends than they feel to the people in the church. And the church is sort of a narrow slice and aspect of their life. And there is loss with that. Now, I think if one really wants to address this in seriousness, they would have to, with a great deal of intentionality, probably limit the number of relational circles they have in their life. And try to create a community where you work and live and worship all with your same people. I've seen this with immigrant groups. Immigrant groups tend to do this. I grew up to a certain degree with that in the Christian Reformed Church. We all went to school together. Their school kids and the church kids were the same kids. We tended to intermarry with those kids. There were relational networks, and it's a great way to live. But now, at, you know, the age that you're at, Jeff, you can't just rip apart your life. Well, you could, but you would have to, you and your wife and your children would basically say, this is what we're going to do. And it would be sort of an emigration story where you'd leave your city and maybe move to a small town, or you would intentionally say yes and no to friendships and relationships. And because we do that too in life, I'm no longer close to anyone that I went to from K through 12 with. I'm no longer close to hardly anyone who I was in college with, partly because I'm living in a different part of the country with different people. And so in many ways, the nuclear family is the tiny little tribe you travel along with. So I don't know that the church has an answer for that, because the church is, in a way, especially the way churches have become, sort of functions of that. And unless the church wants to become considerably more cult-like, in that, we're going to start putting pretty heavy demands on people in terms of who they do and don't relate to, well, we're going to deal with these tensions. And as a pastor, I have sort of made my peace with these tensions. And I've counseled people along this line before that having too many non-overlapping relational spheres is very hard on human beings. And I don't think overall it's a terribly healthy thing. Now, if you go to a small town and you live in a small community and you're there in your whole life, and some people are living that because they live in the town they grew up in, all their family's there, they went to the same church, everybody is in one thing, a lot of those people will complain, man, you can't grow up out of anything here. The thing you did in 5th grade follows you for the rest of your life. Well, there's upsides and downsides to both of these things. And in places like California, a lot of people come here because they're getting away from their past. And, well, you can do that. You can sort of start over, but you also don't have those deep, long-term relationships like you had. Now, in a perfect world, those relationships are healthy and accountable and life-giving and meaningful. And they're also cumbersome and complicated, and all kinds of other sins grow up in them. So what you're describing is, I think, part of the system. And I think that if you want to address it, exert some intentionality over your life, but that's going to mean sacrifices in terms of work and worship and community, saying no to some people and jobs and things in order to say yes to others, in order to limit the number of disconnected relational communities that you participate in.
Sounds easy for somebody who's extremely high in agreeableness. Thanks, Paul.
Yep.
Good question, Jeff. I was thinking John Van Donk's idea of conversations on the edge would probably foster some deeper relationships in church too, right?
Yeah. One of the hardest things about, so it's not uncommon for, and I have this in spades now with the internet, okay, somebody hears me on YouTube and it's like, oh wow, Paul sounds like such a nice guy. I'd really like, I want Paul to be my friend. And part of me wants to be that person's friend too. But I can only have so many friends. And sometimes, I just took Daniel to the psych ward yesterday, and he's not here this morning, so maybe it's stuck, and maybe he'll, his goal was to be in for about 3 or 4 weeks, so maybe he accomplished his goal. But, Daniel is my friend not because I chose Daniel, but because he camped against my door and wouldn't leave me alone. And that's how we became friends. So it's often people will come into the church and get to know me, and then they'll ring me up and say, hey, Paul, you want to go do this or do that, do this, do that? And it's like, I'd really love to, but I also have a hierarchy of relationships that I have to maintain, and it's hard to keep them open. Now, a number of years ago, the cell group movement kind of went into the church, and And a lot of these dynamics are within that movement, because people come into a church and they're like, wow, this is amazing. My life is changing. I found God. I found Jesus. I found religion. I found a whole new group of friends. But almost everybody in the church has all of their available relational slots filled. And so there's no new slots for this person. And so what churches try to intentionally do is always try to keep an empty seat at the table and build that into the culture, so that, well, I don't know if we'll, over time, and I often, people will say, well, how do I really get into a church? I usually say, just keep going, because eventually someone else will come, and who knows, over time relationships happen. Another part of the problem is our instant culture, because people come in and they see the potentiality for new relationships and friendships, and they think it's going to happen right away. It might take 10 years. They're like, 10 years? Yeah, 10 years. But that's people.
Okay, we'll go on to the next one. Next question is from With a K. Have you seen any of the Dark Stoa videos on the Stoa? I would love to hear your take on them, especially when it gets into what's essentially AI Jesus. Warning, existential terror may ensue.
I have not seen any of those, so maybe drop some links and I'll try and take a look. Shortest answer I ever gave.
Okay, so the next one is from B. Palmer. And he's not here, he had to step out, so I guess he'll get his answer when he listens to the recording. Hi, Paul. I'm a longtime YouTube viewer, new to the Discord. I actually joined the Discord so I could contribute to the Q&As, so thanks for continuing to do these. I have 2 questions. Brett and Eric Weinstein have frequently commented on how truth-seeking cannot withstand contact with market forces. Example, university research. I'm curious how this idea may or may not interact with church institutions, where clergy or other staff members continually fundraise for their own salaries, not unlike academics who are constantly grant writing to fund their careers. Have you ever encountered tension between church or ministry as an institution versus the truth-seeking and embodied love that comes with following Christ? How do you think about and resolve such tensions?
Let's deal with that one first, and then we'll go on to the next one.
Sounds good.
That's an excellent question, and I deal with it all the time. I've wrestled with that a lot with respect to this channel, and I'm planning probably in the next few weeks to make some videos about this, again, because of what's happening at Living Stones. And those who are supporting me on Patreon or some other ways, I'm going to keep Patreon open because some people would rather support me directly, which I will facilitate that. But I didn't want the standard protocol would be for there to be special patron only videos, to be a paywall, kind of a freemium pay to play. The church, I think, has established a wonderful way for its servants to be supported. And the church has long had tradition about this. The Apostle Paul quotes the Old Testament, "You shall not muzzle the ox." Jesus says the laborer is worthy of his wages. And so I think it is absolutely appropriate for churches to pay clergy and to support the ministry in that way. I think bivocational clergy is a fine way to go about it too. I think there's room for both. Paul was a tent maker, and Paul dealt with both of those systems. The Apostle Paul did. Sometimes he was supported by the people that he was staying with, and other times he made tents and supported himself out in the marketplace. I never wanted to have a big sell in terms of, send me money. If in fact Living Stones can't continue to support me and I opt to try to not get another church that won't allow me the freedom to do what I'm doing with this. I might make more of a concerted effort to ask for support. But generally speaking, I like the church model, because with a freemium model, so if you support Paul at a Patreon level of $100 a month, you can have a half-hour conversation with him. Oh, okay. Again, that's not a bad thing, but there's a lot of interesting conversations to be had with people who either don't want to send any money or don't have any money. And sort of the way it works in churches, that those who have more money than others give more, and those who don't have any money give less. And that's the way it works in my church. There's a handful of people that pay my salary, and many, many more pay a little bit, and some don't pay anything. Yet I am pastor to all of them. And so in that way, those who give more because they have more, they facilitate the community. And I work very hard to, whereas I would be an idiot if I didn't know who had more money than who didn't in the church. So of course I have a good idea about who is giving more and who is giving less, but I try to treat everyone the same. And it's so ironic that Daniel, the homeless alcoholic who lives on my door, tithes to the Mormon church. They don't even let him in the door. And it's like, well, Daniel, you should, but I'm never going to tell him, you should tithe here because he's a Mormon. So he's like, I want to pay my tithe. I want to pay my tithe. And I thought, okay, go pay your tithe. I'm the one who drives you to the hospital and takes care of you. And I look at that and I think that's the economy of the kingdom of God. And so, I'd prefer, now we've got a new online giving system that I'll start putting out the links for, and it uses Stripe, so it can be in many different countries and work. So I like that system better, because Eric and Brett have a point that there is a tension between market forces and the academy, because the academy, quite frankly, is an offshoot of the church. And I just heard, and I'm kind of wondering if the death of the academy that Eric and Brett are seeing isn't actually just the long-term consequence of the divorce of the academy from the church. So, but these tensions are in church ministry all the time. There are faith missionaries, there are televangelists. Kenneth Copeland needs his new private jet. Steve Furtick has a multi-million-dollar house. And so these things are not secrets. Billy Graham, I think in many ways, did things well, in that he knew that his ministry would bring in a ton of money. And so he established an organization to which he was accountable. He clearly had a lot of influence and power within it, but they paid him a salary, and he didn't just, have the millions. When Purpose-Driven Life, Rick Warren wrote that book, and it became this tremendous bestseller, and royalties rolled in. He had to figure out what to do with that. And as a Christian minister, I think you don't see pictures on the internet of Rick Warren's house because he doesn't live in a palace, and that says a lot to me about who he is. So yes, there is tension between market forces and ministry as institution. It's interesting that in the Middle Ages, these monasteries who took vows of poverty, well, the individual monks took vows of poverty, but the monasteries got fabulously wealthy in some cases. So what do you do with that? And in some ways, the Roman Catholic Church still struggles with these kinds of issues. So they're very, very real. And so maybe that little answer I gave will give you some ideas of the practice of the Christian Reformed Church. The Christian Reformed Church has been both extraordinarily generous towards its churches. I remember Sky Jitani writing an article once I saw it on social media. Here's one denomination that that really understands how to support ministry. And I thought, oh, good, I can learn something. And I went to the article, and it was the Christian Reformed Church. I thought, oh, okay. The Christian Reformed Church has had a long, healthy tradition of sacrificial giving. And Christian Reformed ministers, generally speaking, live, have a more secure salary than a lot of other churches that I see that are bivocational. I think that's passing away as the Christian Reformed Church becomes more and more American or Canadian. But the practice of the Christian Reformed Church was they wanted to compensate their ministers in a way that the minister would not be worried about his putting food on the table. And so in many cases, Christian Reformed ministers had enough. My grandfather, during the Depression, the churches often couldn't pay him any cash because they didn't have any money. They'd give him a ham or a piece of a hog or often a lot of butter because they were dairymen. And my grandfather and grandmother worked a garden and, survived. Never became rich. My father and mother never were rich. I'm not rich. I doubt I'll ever be. But, yes, those tensions are there. So it's a great question. And I like it when the church basically says, here's where you can give to support this. But he's still your minister, whether you give $100,000 a year or nothing. Because I'm not here, I work for God. And so give to God, and via the institutions of the church, God will take care of me. And I think that's a practice that the church has had, and I think it's a good way. All right, second question.
All right, so the conversation around truth-seeking versus market forces seems core to how we might describe or understand the IDW. Could the same paradigm be said of the ILW? People like you, Jonathan Peugeot, Rod Dreher, etc., are obviously very church positive, but much of the conversation and audience is insulated from the church proper. Is the intellectual light web a sort of reaction against the embedded growth obligations of post-Christendom faith-based institutions? Or could we say that our ability to work out our faith in our culture is in some sense degraded by market forces inside the church?
Market forces, like the poor, are always with us. Because market forces are not that much different. The market forces are deeply connected to hierarchies. Supply and demand, that's a hierarchy. Market forces present themselves in churches in many other ways, not just with money. Not everybody in church is equally pleasant to be around. Not everybody in church is equally charismatic. Not everybody in church is equally socialized. Not everybody in church is equally life-giving or self-giving to others. There are popularity contests in the church. There are petty disagreements and long-term feuds within the church. Part of the reason evangelicalism grew the way it did, and I've often said that evangelicalism is a market more than it is a church, is because even though there are market forces within the church and political forces within the church, the values of the church are there to moderate and buffer some of these forces. And Jesus' teachings do that quite intentionally. Now, what we have out here, because we do not have, the Church of Jesus Christ is not unified. And that's especially true in America, where there is no state church. So in some ways, Jonathan Peugeot and Rod Dreher and Paul Vanderklay are out there on their own. And so market forces will impact. Jonathan Peugeot has 7 or 8 times more YouTube subscribers than I have. Jonathan Peugeot is depending on Patreon for a substantial portion of his the support he needs to feed his family. Rod Dreher is working a blog in which there are advertisements, and the number of page views he gets will impact the value of the advertising, and that then supports him. So the intellectual light web, when I talked about that, I mean the intellectual dark web, dark web is the idea that here you've sort of got an internet beneath the internet that is, and it's institutionally resistant. You need that FU money in order to be a real IDW member, and so, Brett Weinstein is aspiring to that, but Eric has his money from the day job that he had, and Jordan Peterson had a Patreon account that went wild, and I don't know how much Jordan is getting from other things. But Jordan sold his book, and his book sold very, very well, and he's now a multimillionaire because of his book. And Joe Rogan has FU money, and on and on and on and on. I do not believe that Jonathan Peugeot has FU money. I do not believe that Rod Dreher has FU money, and I can tell you I don't have FU money. But in the intellectual light web, we are, at least in some ways, even via a market mechanism, dependent upon the church. And so I don't know what a perfect world would look like, but that's part of the reason I like doing what I'm doing from within the church. And so far, at least, Living Stones has been inviting of the work that I've been doing in this way. And ideally, even Living Stones will say it doesn't live for itself. Living Stones lives for Christ's larger kingdom. And so if the people at Living Stones are paying me, and I'm spending a lot of time with people who aren't even physically present in this community, and people who won't darken the door, and people who will never give a dime to any of this effort. When people at Living Stones put money in the plate, they give it to God. And they give it to God through the church. But when I serve you, I'm serving God. And in that way, we're sort of establishing one big kingdom, one big union where, and in some ways, ironically, that's how the United States tax pays for it. I mean, if I start paying to play here, that's not a tax deductible contribution. Basically, if you give to Living Stones, there's no strings attached. You're saying, I support this effort. Now, you can always stop supporting it, but so yeah, these are all really good questions, and they're very real and very present.
Okay, I just want to give anybody in the room an opportunity to ask a question. Okay, well, we'll go on to the next one. It's from Arul Ross.
Wait, Sherry.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I as someone that just came into the faith, Paul, I've been studying what it means to be practicing and understanding this whole philosophy thing, and as a father and a stepdad and a husband. And I like what you said with Benjamin Voice, where you said that the people who are really trying to be in following the Christian way of being, it's really, really difficult. And it made me think that a lot of the Christianity, or a lot of the symbols that we get from the movies and even video games, are extremely influenced by Gnostic Christianity. They seem to have a profound connection, and because it seems to be very appealing, and you could see it even in John Vervaeke, and you could see it in a lot of these atheists, or even some Protestants. I find them to be more like Gnostics than anything else. What do you think?
Yeah, I think modernity, ironically, because it accentuates the differences between the consciousness and materiality, tends to elevate a sort of Gnosticism because the divide between them is accentuated. And so that you see that played out in modern Protestant churches, where this world is not my home, I'll fly away. And so the ironically, the separation between heaven and earth gets even larger. So no, I think that's very true, and that's where the reintegration of consciousness, the move towards final participation, is very anti-Gnostic, and it's very neo-sacramental, and it reinforces the important union of body and soul, which I think is the Hebrew counter to, I think that's Jerusalem's bulwark against Athens. So, great question.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, I'll go on to the next one. This is from Arul Ross. How do you interpret "do not conform to the patterns of this world"? I see Christianity in the historically recent past, perhaps before, as adopting every single cultural aspect of the prevailing paradigm. We don't make any claim on what should be some timeless cultural specifics of the life as a Christian, and just legalistically chart out biblically what is expressly or otherwise obviously condemned, tacitly baptizing all other cultural modes as part of the buffet that we can select from as per our personal taste. This leads to a situation which I think was really instrumental in the initial straying of the West and the Western world from its Christian roots. When the life of a Christian and a non-Christian channels the same zeitgeist in spirit and particulars, and a good Christian life looks exactly the same as that of a straight-edged non-Christian who has not yet cut the cultural strings, there is no more reason, existentially speaking, though it is still justified theologically and propositionally, to cling onto this now purely private metaphysical overlay. At the heart of this, on one hand, we have the claim that God's position on any culture that does not explicitly transgress the law is deeply unknowable, and on the other hand, the view that we have a pretty good sense within our own limitations of what constitutes godly culture, down to the specifics of economics, daily lifestyle, entertainment, humor, attitude towards creation, responsibility to our neighbors. To take it out of the abstract, you could answer this question. Do you think moving into the increasingly Gnostic digitized world, abandoning the physical world and its sacramental coupling of matter and spirit, is currently reaching a critical mass, a ledge from which we need to pull back, or that it is just something we Christians should tacitly go along with? Which is kind of like Michelle's question.
Yeah. It's a great question. It's a question that Christians have struggled with forever. So now, in the quotation, do not conform to the patterns of this world. What do we mean by this world? Because in a Hebrew sense, this world belongs to God. This is my Father's world. For God so loved the world. So, which patterns? Which is in many ways what the question is asking. We also live in a culture which, although it is deeply compromised in terms of Christian values and virtues, is also deeply impacted by Christian values and virtues. In some ways, you have to read, do not conform to the patterns of this world, also with Jesus' parable of the wheat and the tares. In terms of our individual discipleship, let me say it this way. In the 1920s, the Christian Reformed Church came out with a synodical, this is how the Christian Reformed Church works. They had a synodical report, synodical committee on worldly amusements. And the Christian Reformed Church prohibited movie going, just at the time movies were getting cleaner. Prohibited card playing, prohibited dancing, warned about certain non-Christian forms of music, and for the next couple of decades, the Christian Reformed Church reinforced and disciplined according to these things. And so Christian Reformed people did not go to the movies. Christian Reformed people did not learn how to dance. And if you've ever watched the Dutch dance, well, maybe there are reasons for it. Christian Reformed people did not play with face cards, as they were called, with kings and queens and aces. Christian Reformed people started playing rook with ones and twos and colors and a bird on the cards. Christian Reformed people, I remember the first time I ever went to see a movie. Like many Christian Reformed people, the first movie I saw was The Sound of Music, because, well, that really was near and dear to Dutch people's hearts. About, here's this lovely Christian family escaping from the Nazis when the Dutch had borne the burden of the Nazi occupation throughout the war. In the 1970s, the Christian Reformed Church took a turn away from that towards cultural discernment and an idea that if the do not conform to the patterns of this world emphasized one stream of consciousness in the Christian Reformed Church called the antithesis. There's good and there's bad, there's right and there's wrong, and the line between them is clear, and Christians should stay on one side. And that's true. The other mind within the Christian Reformed Church was that of common grace. That does God work through even movies done by very sinful people? Which part of our culture is not the weeds and the wheat? These questions that you ask are great questions, and all of them have to be answered by us as individuals, and as communities we have to wrestle with them. But it's really hard. So you can look at a group like the Amish, who basically have said, well, this is how godly people live. Well, someone from an ancient Hebrew would look at the Amish and say, well, you're awfully modern. But we look at the ancient Hebrews and say, well, you have that new moon festival. What's with that? I think if you wanted to be a very scrupulous Christian, you might not celebrate New Year's. All you would do is celebrate the coming of Advent each year, because that's the beginning of the Christian New Year. Some Christian sects, like the Jehovah's Witnesses, don't celebrate birthdays. They don't celebrate national holidays, because that's giving in to the world. And so the difficulty with figuring this out is, where does the world begin and the world end? Where does God's grace begin? And where is that line? And on one hand, we have to both respect the antithesis, that there's good, bad, right, and wrong, and the law is a guide. Now, I'll show myself a Calvinist here. The law is a guide to grateful Christian obedience. Yet, the law is modulated by Jesus Christ himself. And so the dietary law is set aside. So should Christians eat meat? Ron Siders wrote a book, Rich Christians in an Age of Hunger, where in the 1970s he's told Christians, stop eating meat, because if we would feed people with grain, the world could eat. You Christians in North America who are eating meat are taking food out of the mouths of the poor. Come 2020, we're supposed to stop eating meat because of cows fart so much. And it's a terribly inefficient way. So these questions have always been with the church, and the church has struggled with how to, as communities, lead its people in obedient lives to Christ. And should Christians go to movies? Should Christians listen to... Pat Boone used to make cover songs for black artists, secular artists. Evangelicalism decided, we're going to have rock music, but we're going to put Christian lyrics in. These issues have been played through again and again and again and again in so many different ways. And the takeaway from that is not to give up the challenge, but probably to continue to grow in discernment and to try to figure out how to live in obedience. Now, again, for me, as a Heidelberg Catechism Dutch Calvinist preacher, I believe in misery, deliverance, gratitude. That we are saved by Jesus Christ, full stop. Obedient living is our response to the gracious gift that God has given us. And I think strenuous, sacrificial, obedient living is best done out of a spirit of gratitude and not out of a spirit of fear. Because most assuredly, if we can look at past generations, we will get a lot of stuff wrong. And when we're trying to pull out those tares or those weeds, we'll probably pull out some wheat. And we will be confused about what is the product of the Holy Spirit and what is the product of our own sinful nature. So, there's that answer. All right, we better just see if we can go through the rest of these questions quickly, or we'll punt them to next week, because we're about out of time.
Well, okay, we can always leave it for next week if you want to, Paul.
That would, let's see, how do you translate it? I'm sure it's impossible to prevent others from misinterpreting things. To conclude, continue practice. How you thought about being clear as a person, pastor. Internet sensation. Woohoo! I'm a sensation. Today is my mother's birthday. Hey, Topher and Topher's mom and me have the same birthday. How about that? Feminine. Yeah, let's save these for another week. Why do you? Oh, let me take the last one. Why do you take cheap shots at Donald Trump? I've had a long relationship with Donald Trump. Donald Trump was a stock. If you go back over my sermons, Donald Trump for me was a stock sermon illustration for all sorts of things that a rule was mentioning in his question. Donald Trump has, for most of his life, attempted to be a poster child for something of a worldly playboy. And that's the Donald Trump that I've known for decades. I grew up in the New York metropolitan area. Donald Trump who's on the Howard Stern show. Donald Trump who, Donald Trump was a well-known quantity, and like many of the world, when he descended that golden escalator with his third wife, announcing his presidency for the United States, I thought, this is crazy. But look, he gets elected. I'm not one who's got Trump derangement syndrome. I think some of the things Donald Trump has done as president of the United States are good. And I think that of most presidents of the United States. I have had to temper a lot of what I have said about Donald Trump since he was elected, because he's in office and the office deserves some respect. And there are some ways in which I didn't vote for Hillary either. I often wind up voting for some obscure third party. because I didn't want to see Hillary in office either, and I didn't want to see Donald in office, but one of the two of them was going to be, so I don't have Trump derangement syndrome. It's really hard to know somebody through the media, and actually in some ways I have more respect for Donald Trump than I did before he took office. Because he got himself elected president. That's something. And he has reflected a certain degree of strange performative genius in office. And when he does stuff, I'm never, I listen to, every now and then I'll listen to Scott Adams, and so I try to keep an open mind. Is this craziness or this genius? But then I, listen to John Bolton's take of Trump, which is that he doesn't read, he isn't attentive to details, he works from the gut. What he did with Kim Il, with North Korea. On one hand, I was really pleased that he backed us away from a bloody confrontation. Amen to that. And if it means, going and shaking his hand and stepping into North Korea and giving little Rocket Man a little bit of love, all power to you. Let's not have a shooting war with North Korea. I'm in favor of that. But he overpromises almost continually, and like I said, some of the things he's done I think we're good. Some of the things he's done I think aren't good. I say that of every president. So actually, he's got a little bit more respect from me than he had before, because I watched it. I used to watch The Apprentice, and it was a very entertaining show. Part of what disturbs me is that I see a little too much of that in terms of, I'm going to hire the best people. And then he fires them pretty quickly, too. So history will be the judge of Donald J. Trump more than my individual perspectives. And I think Trump derangement syndrome on one side is mirrored by Trump defensiveness syndrome on the other side. I participated in a political listserv after the Obama presidency, and everybody was still sort of fawning all over Obama. And there was a lot of aspects of Barack Obama that I like, a lot of aspects about George W. Bush that I like. And would I, if Donald Trump were available to me, would I be his friend? Of course. I'm Daniel's friend. I wouldn't want Daniel to be president. I could be Donald Trump's friend. I don't have any problem with that. I could be Barack Obama's friend. And I remember I asked this group, I said, what if you had to give, they're almost all retired academics from Calvin College. I asked them, what grade would you give Obama's presidency? And then I gave them my grade. I said I frankly gave him a C-. Oh, people were just appalled that I was insufficiently laudatory of Barack Obama. And, okay. But I said, look, they were saying, but Barack could have been so much better if the Republicans hadn't shut him down. And it's like, you deal with the Congress you have, not the Congress you want. And so, in some ways, Trump's been more successful than Obama in dealing with opposition, because Trump's had at least as much opposition as Obama, and Trump's weathered it. So there's some qualities and some attributes of Trump that I think I respect, and I say, wow, that's very impressive. There's some other aspects of his buffoonery that I am dismissive of. So isn't that the same trap as the progressives get lost in when they assume a difference in opinion that can only be a lack of information or ability to correctly process it? Well, again, I have to see Donald Trump through the lens that we are offered, and I may really be getting it wrong. I'm far more balanced to other individuals as there's something to believe and supporters are actually missing. I do not. My church has plenty of Donald Trump voters. And I respect people who voted for Donald Trump. They didn't want to vote for Hillary, and they liked Donald Trump, so they voted for him. I don't have any problem with Trump voters. But I've watched Donald Trump a long time. Go back and dig up his appearance on Howard Stern. Go back and read and look at some of the things he said about him. And so when he shows up in front of a church holding a Bible, I get pretty cynical pretty fast. So I try not to steer too much in terms of politics because, as I've said many times, I'm a religious believer and a political skeptic. And so I'm not about to say Donald Trump is a morally virtuous man. But here's another point. Look at how the book of Isaiah talks about Cyrus the Great. He's a servant of the Lord. Wow. Cyrus the Great, do a little background on him. He was an impressive leader. Sure, he had a harem. He was by no means, he rebuilt the temple. And so, I also have a very, God wanted Donald Trump to be president. There, I said it. And why? That's the Lord's business. And I suspect Donald Trump will be a one-term president. I won't vote for him. I never would vote for him because he's a clown. Now, Peugeot has a point. Clowns bring the world right. And when Kanye runs for president, it's like, well, we're deeper into clown world here. And when Kanye's still running his campaign, even though he fired the guy that was supposed to get him on the ballot. So Kanye's running a campaign for an election he's not even on the ballot of. And I say more power to him. I don't think Kanye would make a good president either. I loved and deeply respected my father. My father was a deeply Christian man. He was a wonderful man. My values very much line up with my father. My father would have made a terrible president of the United States. I don't think I would make a good president of the United States. It's one of the toughest jobs in the world. So, Donald Trump, I don't have a lot of respect for his morals or his character or the morals in which he has guided his life. But he's president of the United States. Got to deal with it. Lord willing, if we continue to have the blessings we do in this nation, that we have a constitution and we have peaceful exchange of power, I'm deeply troubled by Donald Trump already talking about this is going to be the most corrupt election. We need stability in this country. We need our institutions. And I think, deep state, all of this stuff, I'm not a political expert. Everybody has their own political beliefs. I'm not a fan of Donald Trump. But he's president of the United States, so I've got to offer him some respect because of the office. But I also, as a citizen, am fully within my rights to critique him as a leader. And I don't want that to be the center of my channel because I want my audience, and I don't have a problem when people are upset because I don't like Donald Trump. Well, I'm not upset because you do. We all have opinions. And let's share our opinions and love each other with them and sometimes in spite of them. So there's my screed on Donald Trump. And let me tell you, I'm putting this on the internet and I get a lot more flack from the left than I do from the right because I'm insufficiently critical of Donald Trump. But I believe that there's such a thing as Trump derangement syndrome because I've seen people fall into it. And I tell them, I say, look, you don't like Donald Trump? Don't give him so much of your mind or attention. He's president for the next 4 years and live with it. And look for the blessings that will come out of it, because there usually are. And next time you get a chance to vote, you don't like Donald Trump, don't vote for him. That's, to me, all very simple. You have to appreciate the fact that as a pastor, people talk to me about all kinds of things. And a lot of what people talk to me about is their political ideas. People look at Alex Jones and say, oh, he's a nut. Well, he is. But you know what? The country is full of nuts. And Alex Jones, the only thing unusual about Alex Jones is that he's got a big following to share all of his crazy ideas. Most of those crazy ideas I hear in one form or another from all sorts of people. So that's what democracy is. And the fact that Donald Trump got elected at all, that really surprised me. But he did. So he's president. So, you live with it. 4 years later, you get another whack at it. So that's how I see it. So I'm sorry if it's off-putting, if I'm insufficiently laudatory of Donald Trump. It's off-putting to the other side that I'm insufficiently laudatory of Barack Obama. And if I say something nice about Obama, people get upset. If I say something nice about Trump, people get upset. If I say something insufficiently laudatory of Obama, people get upset. That's why, generally speaking, I like to avoid politics, but you can't avoid politics. So those are my cards. Those are my takes. Everybody has political ideas, even if they're ideas to be non-political. It's just part of life. And I think we should, just like people have all sorts of crazy ideas of religion, but I'll think they're crazy. They don't think they're crazy. They think my ideas are crazy. That's it's human diversity. Diversity of ideas and opinions. Can we love each other even though we have these ideas? I hope so.
Thank you, Paul. I'm just going to read Noctempra's response. You are quite accurate that Trump is not easy to characterize as good morals. Thank you for a very complete response. I am convinced it was my broken filter question was intentionally narrow to the cheap shots.
Well, maybe they are cheap shots. And that's, I've often said, we all have our besetting sins. And one of my besetting sins, the book of Proverbs has the fool and the mocker. I tend to be towards the mocker side of things. And there's mockery isn't necessarily sinful, but when I mock people out of self-righteousness and self-importance, it is. And so you're probably right that when I take a cheap shot at anyone is a cheap shot, and it's probably sinful. And so I should learn to control my tongue a little better than I do. But I look at this. I look at these political games, and I think, frankly, right now in America, people are taking politics way too seriously. Take your religion more seriously than your politics because it's more foundational. And politics is serious. It's an aspect of life. We should strive to do it well. We should strive to be good Christians in politics, but let's not take our politics too seriously. As I mentioned in one of in the Peugeot Boyce conversation, a survey a few years ago said that more Americans would be more upset if their son or daughter married someone of the opposite political party than of another race. There's something to be celebrated in that, hey, people maybe are a little less racist than they used to be. That's a good thing. Something to be lamented in that. Politics has gotten way out of hand. And, we should be friends across the political aisle. We should love our friends who hate the other side. And if you're able to maintain a friendship with someone who votes differently than you, count that as a virtue.
Thank you very much, Paul, for such an honest answer. That was awesome.
Thank you. I'll end the recording now. And thank all of you for coming.